Hello, Nabil. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Let's see, because the people is moving away and coming from. Okay, so thank you very much for being with us this afternoon. We have Nabil Ahmed from California that is going to be with us. Nabil is an expert in augmented reality and virtual reality, and we are very good friends. We have been working together since time ago. And basically, what I would like to share with you is that first, we are going to transmit something that is very special, is that in fact Metaverses has been with us since many, many years ago. It's part of the human community, the human society. You will understand later why I'm saying this. The second thing is that I would like to make a special insight on how the brain is working with information, with the inputs that we have from outside, how we perceive what we call reality. And this is very important because you will see that there is a process in which we will talk about, reference spaces as well as patterns. And also we are talking about technologies that are accelerating the perception of metaverses today. So all in all, what we would like is to give you a little bit deeper information sense of what we are talking about metaverses. So Nabil, thank you for being with us. And I will, if you can share with the audience, your background and how we have been working together in the past, whatever you want.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alberto, for the warm introduction. And I look forward to discussing the concept of the metaverse with everyone here. So I think we are at a cusp of a new revolution in how humans interact with the digital world. And I think in the next 5 to 10 years, we'll witness an evolution in how we connect with people and also the world around us. And my background, I've been at Meta or Facebook for over 7 years. I've worked on a variety of different technologies. And I am today working in reality labs on AR and VR technologies. And I have extensive background in communication systems as well, both on device side and on the network side as well. So that's a little bit of a background on me. I'd like to hand over the talk to you, Alberto. But before I do, just a quick disclaimer here that although I'm a Meta employee, the ideas and concepts that we are presenting in this talk are our own. They are not in any way the opinions of Meta as a company. So with that said, Alberto, please give us an introduction to the metaverse.
Okay, Nabil, thank you very much. So the first thing that I would like to share with you is basically the definition of the metaverse, but this is not the most important thing. This is something that you can find everywhere in internet. The important thing here is to realize that the metaverse has been with us for many, many years, and it's associated basically with a process that the brain has to understand and to manage the complexity around us. So basically, and what is happening is that all the digital technologies that we have today are accelerating all this process. That is a process that we have, from centuries ago, I would say. So perhaps the most important thing is understanding how the brain works. The brain is receiving inputs from, first of all, our senses, our 5 senses. Also is receiving inputs associated from the responsiveness of an action that I am, sending to the environment. And more important, the brain is having access to big data that is already stored in the brain and is setting up a process of filtering things so that basically the brain is expecting what he is going to see, what he is going to feel, so based on past experiences. So in fact, what is happening is that you see that we have a lot of data and also we have an exposition to this data. And what is happening is that the brain managed to deal with complexity. And what it's doing in this environment in which the reference spaces are changing constantly, what the brain is doing basically is identifying patterns. For those of you that are programmers, is the equivalent, to a high-level language in comparison with, machine language. And basically, it's the way in which the brain, through patterns, is managing complexity. This is very important because, this reality that we feel is directly connected with the concept of metaverse. So we would like to explain a little bit so that following the previous presentation, we will have some insights about, how the metaverse process is evolving. So if you see, patterns are basically organizations of symbols with specific meanings. I'm not going to go very in depth in this, but basically, and anyone that is fluent with artificial intelligence knows that this process, that if I want to have a model of a cat, I'm not going to have all the dots, all the pixels of the image of a cat. What I'm going to do is identifying some specific things that are special from the cats, that are groups of data, and these are the patterns, basically. And so we are building the knowledge and the understanding associated with these patterns. So patterns are the basis in forming new reference spaces. Forming new reference spaces, a reference space is the way in which we understand reality, and a metaverse is a way of understanding the reality. This is something that has happened, along the history of our society. So, for instance, if you look the chess players, they are not looking all the pieces in the table. They are seeing pictures like an impressionist, painting, and so they know what's going to be the next thing. So, in fact, they have specific patterns, and this is the very best powerful process that the brain has to manage this complexity and to understand the world. I'm a private pilot. And I remember when I started to fly, that I was looking at each of the goggles, each of the elements of the plane, and as you can see, there are many, many, many. But at some point, you move to another reference space. You move to another universe. And it's when you start to feel combinations of these things. And then you live in another world, basically, with the responsiveness, with things that you are understanding, and then is when you start to enjoy flying. And doctors, and in fact anything related with learning is associated with this process, and this is the way in which the brain is working. But look, let me give you some insights about the super technologies associated with big data that we have in this moment, and that will help to accelerate all the process of moving to new universes, new reference space. Basically, what you see here is a representation, a raw representation of telephone calls. Many years ago, in the sector, we started to do this. I think that it was something like 20 years ago. And suddenly we started to use some kind of technologies associated with identifying patterns, because, the brain is able to identify patterns, but not all the possible existing patterns are there. So if you have digital technologies to help the brain to understand what would be the interesting patterns, this would be great. So these and these are the same. The only thing is that here we have identified the patterns. So you don't see here the edges and the nodes. What you see here are these figures with a specific meaning. I remember that my marketing department in a telco company started to think in this way instead on this other way. It was a different reference space. It was a different world on making all the different proposals that we were doing at that time. So if you see there is something very interesting news here, is that it's not only the brain that is the one able to identify patterns. You can empower with digital technology the possibility of finding new patterns. But not only this, you have metaverses, and everyone is having his metaverse or his perception of the reference space or his universe. But the interesting thing is, because we are in a world in which we are interacting and we are perceiving and we see the responsiveness of our actions, is if this reference space is shared by a large community. Well, in network science, that is in fact a branch of data science, in network science, what we have seen is that networks, real networks, evolve in a way in which suddenly, there is a process of percolation or alignment, so that all the elements of the network align and feel the same. Let's say this way. Well, there are technologies in this moment to understand and to analyze this. So imagine, for instance, if you are myself, I am a pilot, as I have told you, but I'm playing the flight simulator, and it's a real metaverse in which I have other friends, other pilots. I feel everything as it would be exactly the same. But the wonderful thing is that I have all kind, of people having the same experience, or the mass games, that you have, today in the industry. So again, specific technologies, very deep technologies in data science, artificial intelligence, network science, that are helping to accelerate this process. And Nabil, it's your time, so you can continue with this amazing explanation about the metaverse.
Awesome, thanks Alberto. So we wanted to share with you an example of a kind of a community-led shared reference space that's akin to the metaverse not too long ago, by examining the evolution of mobile internet and social media. And so you can see from the statistics shown on the top left side of the slide, the internet growth has skyrocketed with the advent of smartphones. And today, most of the users, almost 90% of them, access the internet through their phones. And we are seeing a continuing increase in the number of users year over year, along with increases in time spent online. In fact, if you look at the statistics, you see that we spend almost a third of our lives online, which is quite amazing. The figure on the bottom right is actually showing the growth of social media online. And social media has become one of the most compelling online activities for people, with up to 93% of all internet users using some form of social media. So with a sustained growth of 10% year over year, it's clear that social media has become the world's digital town square where people come together to share ideas and thoughts. So today we take all these social media experiences for granted, but in fact this reference space has evolved over time, and it's gradually become part of the human experience, making mobile social media a new dimension, or what we call a reference space for human consciousness. So if we move to the next slide, I want to briefly talk a little bit about some of the technologies that are driving the development of the metaverse. There are a few notable ones here, and there are probably many more, which we won't be able to cover here. First is there are new technology innovations in AR and VR that are making 3D experiences more immersive and real. Today, we are seeing a gradual adoption of VR technology as it becomes more sophisticated, realistic, and rich in its ability to capture users and virtual environments. And AR is also starting to gain traction, and it's allowing us to stitch the digital world with the physical world, and we are seeing it happen on our mobile phones already through various social media applications. And there's going to be more innovations in technologies such as depth cameras, micro LED displays, and better compute, which will make AR interactions more seamless and natural through the introduction of wearables like smart glasses. And we are hearing a lot about this already in the press. So if you move on to network science, as we discussed, network science is data science applied to networks. So networks act as a bridge for understanding how microscopic interactions and dynamics can lead to global or macroscopic regularities, right? And these are what we call patterns. So in the context of the metaverse, this will help us to understand interactions in the metaverse, how they are formed, how they spread throughout their social network, and they drive macroscopic outcomes across a larger community of users. So network sciences are going to help us understand what metaverse experiences will likely spread and which ones will not gain adoption. So these are not the only technologies that will fuel the metaverse. We expect others to converge in enabling this experience as well. And I'm happy to talk about them offline. So next slide, please. So let's dive a bit deeper into data science and AI to understand how these technologies will improve or better the context of the metaverse. As mentioned, the metaverse will naturally form through patterns of social behavior and proliferation in society. So we know today that social networks embed data on user behaviors and preferences, and that we need to analyze these networks to identify these patterns. So the way we do that is we do social network analysis, and we find regions of high influence, and we discover patterns in those regions. And if you want to promote the spread of those patterns, we typically identify weak links in the network, and then we bolster the spread through them. So in understanding how the network evolves, we can promote good outcomes in the metaverse, and we can prevent bad outcomes. Now, AI and machine learning also play an important role in helping predict outcomes on a data set. So in modern AI, graph neural networks have gained popularity since they help us learn on graph structured data, which are found in almost all facets of science, as you all know. At a high level, as shown in the figure below, a graph neural network is a model that takes as input a graph and uses a structure similar to a convolutional neural network to learn patterns of similarity at the graph, node, or edge levels. And then using this model, we can encode similarities on the social graph, which we call embeddings. And these embeddings help us predict how alike two individuals or communities or even an overall subnetwork is against a particular criterion, like preference, for instance, for particular things. And so we can use this to predict common behavior in response to some stimuli. So GNNs and similar technologies will help us understand how likely patterns in different parts of the social graph will spread to other parts of the social graph. So there's a lot more detail here, but I'd like to conclude the discussion on network science and AI as it relates to metaverse, but I'm happy to discuss details offline. So let's move to next slide. So in this talk, we presented the exciting concept of the metaverse. I think we discussed how it relates to human evolution, and we discussed some underlying technologies that will enable it. I want to conclude by briefly summarizing the road ahead, like where do we go from here? The first is we want to ensure we build the metaverse responsibly. And to do that, we'll need to have some core properties that we'll need to make sure that are true. The first one is economic opportunity. We want to make sure that people have more choice, there is competition in this space, and that we can build a thriving digital economy. So we want to enable that. We want to ensure privacy, which is how we can minimize the amount of data that's used. We can build technology that enables privacy-protected data uses, and we give people access and control over their data. We also want to ensure safety integrity, which is how we can keep people safe online and give them tools to take action or get help if they see something they're not comfortable with. And finally, we want to encourage equity and inclusion, where we want to make sure that these technologies are designed inclusively and they're accessible to everybody. So the metaverse isn't a single product one company is going to build. And just like the internet, the metaverse exists whether or not companies like Meta are there or not. So it won't be built overnight. Many of these products will be realized, maybe in 10, 15 years. But partnerships will be the cornerstone of a thriving and healthy metaverse for everyone.
Nabil, we are running out of time.
We're running out of time. Okay, so I'm almost done. Just to quickly wrap up, I think standardization and technical specifications will need to be agreed upon collaboratively, and we encourage people to participate. We also want to look at governance and make sure governance in the metaverse is shaped by multiple stakeholders like lawmakers, academics, developers, companies, and also people. And finally, we need to build proof points to understand and demonstrate the utility of the metaverse. And there are a couple of ideas here that we have captured, but we have to discuss more of those details offline. I just want to mention one quick thing that there are already companies like Meta that are announcing XR programs and research funds to enable investment in this space. So we encourage people to reach out, participate in these funds and these efforts. Handing it over to you, Alberto. Thank you.
Well, great. In fact, what we wanted to transmit to you is that there are deep technologies in this moment, and also that this is an evolution of the natural human process. So what is clear is that something is going to happen very soon as the development of the metaverse. And also remember, these are the different technologies that are associated with gaming, visualization, making things real that are undistinguishable from the real ones. Well, we are, as we say in the simulation hypothesis in this moment, around 6 technologies that have passed these thresholds. So at some point, we will be in a situation very soon in which we will say, well, are you real? But if we can't say, it doesn't matter. So thank you very much.